With Iraq to one side and Israel to the other, Jordan is a country that fears it could end up as a battlefield. We go there now to the capital, Amman, and CNN's Doug James. Doug?
Jordan, of course, caught in the middle between Israel and Iraq, has been trying its best to stay out of this dispute. King Hussein has said repeatedly that he will not accept any incursion of territory or airspace by either side or by any aggressor. Now, of course, with the prospect of Israel retaliating against Iraq, there is the possibility that Israeli jets will fly over Jordanian airspace. With me now to discuss this is Leif Shubeilat, an independent member of the Jordanian parliament. What do you think is likely to happen now if Israel decides to retaliate against Baghdad?
Like what the king said, we do not allow this to happen, and we have to respond militarily. We have to stop it.
Do you think, is this the only way that Israel can retaliate, by coming through Jordanian airspace or territory?
This is the only way maybe now, because it will expose itself as a member of the coalition. It has been always a member of this coalition. All its resources are committed to the coalition, and it has affected the decision of the coalition. So had it exposed itself and went to Saudi Arabia to attack from there, that would have been different.
What can Jordan do? It has a limited armed forces, of 100,000 man force, I believe. Will it shoot down Israeli aircraft if it's possible?
It will do what's necessary. We'll do our best, but we have to do something.
What will this mean in terms of Jordan? Well, Jordan, obviously, Jordan at that point will enter the war.
It means that Israel has entered the war too, before when they've done this. So a lot of things will change. Not only Israel, Jordan, and maybe all other countries. It will expand.
Is there now also a prospect, if Israel does retaliate against Iraq, that Israeli troops will incur upon Jordanian territory? Will ground forces move into Jordan? If so, why will they do that? How far will they try to go?
That has always been expected. Now that it's happening, it is still expected that Israeli troops would intrude and would try to join forces with the American coalition to hit at Iraq. We have been expecting this before, but maybe now it's closer.
Now, as you know, there was an emergency meeting of the Jordanian parliament last night to discuss the Gulf crisis, the prospects of a widening Middle East war. Certain decisions were taken. There is something that I would like to clarify with you. According to reports, the lower house called on, and I'm quoting here, all Arab and Muslim nations to strike hard at U.S. interests and the interests of other aggressors. What exactly does that mean, given that Jordan has tried to be neutral in this dispute?
It is the Jordanian people's will, and they represent in this the whole Arab nation, the will of the whole people in the Arab world, that they refuse the American aggression against Iraq and the allies, the coalition too. When we convened yesterday, the first thing we discussed the state of the matter, and we were pleased that the Iraqis had made their objective, their first objective, that the war is going to be a long one, and that the Americans failed in attaining their objective. Now the second objective definitely is moving all Arab and Muslim people to rally with Iraq against this aggression.
What does that mean? Are you planning specific actions against U.S. interests, for example, here in Amman? Are we in danger?
We are not planning. You're not in danger, but we're not planning. In Jordan, our government is in harmony with the people, and we work in harmony with our government. This is mainly addressed to those countries whose governments are not in harmony with their people, and those governments that have taken their nations with the coalition, and they're going against the conscience of their people.
All right.
Had they not taken that position, this coalition would have not been there, and the so-called legitimacy of the Arab Islamic nations giving a green light for the Americans to attack and take the Holy Lands and then attack from there, Iraq would not have been now.
Thank you very much, Leif Shubeilat, an independent member of the Jordanian parliament. This is Doug James reporting live for CNN from Amman, Jordan.
Doug James, thanks. Patrick?
We will take a break in our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf. When we come back, we'll have a guest who is a member of the Kurdistan Democratic Party, representing the Kurdish people who lived in the northern part of Iraq, and reports have indicated for some time that these are the people who Saddam Hussein attacked with chemical weapons. We will talk with this gentleman when we come back. Our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf continues. Within Iraq, the Kurdish resistance has seen what chemical weapons can do. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against the Kurds in putting down the opposition to his regime. Joining us from London to talk about what may be going on inside Iraq is a spokesman for the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the opposition to Saddam Hussein, Hoshyar Zebari, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, sir. Welcome. Tell us, if you would, please, about the chemical weapons that Saddam Hussein has used on your people.
Well, Saddam Hussein first used chemical weapons on our people in 1986. And before that, we've been warning the world about Saddam Hussein's chemical capability. But unfortunately, our appeals and our pleas went unheeded. Saddam Hussein committed a chemical massacre in Halabja on the 16th and 17th of March 1988. And later, after the Iran-Iraq ceasefire, he followed it up by gassing dozens of our villages in Iraqi Kurdistan in the north, which led to the influx of nearly 100,000 refugees in neighboring country. Again, we heard some public condemnation, but no actions were taken by the international community to punish Saddam Hussein.
All right, Mr. Zebari, you, I understand you and your Kurdistan party are keeping tabs as best possible on what is going on in Iraq, and I am wondering, do you have any idea what kind of war Saddam Hussein might be waging here? Because the experts are saying thus far he has not waged much of a war at all.
Well, they are terrified from our sources inside Iraq. They have never seen such a war like this before. And people are fleeing the main towns. In fact, they have set up tented camps for a large number of the population from Baghdad, from people from Tikrit, from Samarra and Kirkuk. Also, many of the Iraqi families from Baghdad have left to the Kurdish areas. We know that a large number of Iraqis have crossed into Turkey and into neighboring Iran for fear of this war. And yesterday we have a confirmation that 50 Iraqi soldiers and some officers handed themselves and surrendered to a Turkish border post in Hakkari province.
A lot has been made of during the Iran-Iraq war, that the Scud missiles were used with great frequency. And I am just wondering if you have any idea why we, of course, have had these attacks on Israel, but nothing like the amount of Scuds that were poured on Tehran. Why is that?
Well, probably his missile stockpile must have been undermined by these persistent air raids on their bunkers and storages. At the time during the Iran-Iraq war, they faced no opposition. But from what we know, from our knowledge of the Iraqi military ability, I'm sure they are short on these missiles.
Can you tell us anything about injuries to Iraqi military and civilian populations?
Well, we have learned through our sources, we've received some initial reports that most of the high-value targets in Baghdad and around Baghdad have been hit and destroyed. And also we know that there are a number of military barracks surrounding Baghdad. There has been an intensive attacks on them, especially Al-Rashid military barracks, Al-Taji military barracks, and also in Tikrit, south of Tikrit, where the Iraqi has one of the most extensive military complex and a number of airfields. Also, the attacks have been continuing on airports in the north. We know that in Kirkuk, The airbase there has been severely damaged. The airbase in Mosul and south of Mosul, where they have a number of underground bases, have also been targeted.
Our Peter Arnett in Baghdad, in the very last report he gave us, which we are going to hear again at the top of the hour, was able, with an Iraqi censor standing apparently very close to him, was able to say that the bombing has been very precision, and it's much of what you have described. We do hear that hospitals in some areas of at least Kuwait are filling up with soldiers. Do you know anything about this?
Well, we know that the casualties have been very high indeed among the army and the military, especially the bombing on military barracks around Baghdad and other military headquarters. But so far, in fact, there has been some civilian casualties as far as we know, but they are limited. And they have mainly happened and occurred in Baghdad. After the attack on the headquarters or on the defense ministry, where there is a residential areas, some civilians have been harmed by the bombing.
Okay, let me ask you this also. I am told that, that your people have been keeping a very close eye on Saddam Hussein's nuclear development. Can you tell us anything at all about nuclear development? Has it been spared? Has it been destroyed?
Yes. Well, we know that we revealed actually back in October that Saddam Hussein is excavating for uranium ore in one of the Kurdish mountains in Gara, near the Turkish border. That is close to Sarsink town. And also we've monitored their activities, and we are absolutely confident, and our assertions have been verified by satellite photograph about this huge Iraqi operation, which is extremely secretive. Also, we have noticed a traffic between that site and another site, also in the Kurdish region south of Mosul and Erbil. It's called Qarachukh Mountain, which we strongly believe that this is an Iraqi nuclear facility.
Do you know if they've been bombed?
At the moment, I don't know, but what I know that the south of Kirkuk and south of Mosul, where the Iraqi army has its main armament factories and non-conventional production factories, including this nuclear facility, have been severely attacked by the Allied forces.
All right, we are short.
Another piece of information, in fact, we know that there is a nuclear center just outside Baghdad, a research center in Zafaraniya. Also, we know for sure that it has been attacked.
We thank you for joining us. Hoshyar Zebari of the Kurdistan Democratic Party from northern Iraq. Yeah. And we will continue with our extensive coverage of the war in the Gulf. I'm Patrick Emery.
I'm Jonathan Mann.
This is CNN.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Molly McCoy. Our coverage of the war in the Gulf continues. The world is waiting to see this morning if, how, or when Israel will respond to the second Iraqi missile attack in as many days.
Good morning. I'm Rick Moore. Baghdad was the target of a heavy Allied bombing attack overnight. One report says electricity, water, and telephone communications were knocked out. That lack of facilities is being cited by Iraqi officials for their decision this morning to expel all 36 international journalists from that country. They include the CNN journalist led by correspondent Peter Arnett, who discussed the order with CNN's Patrick Emery about an hour ago, a report censored by Iraqi government officials.
We have restored CNN's communications with the outside world from Baghdad, as you can hear, but it may be the final report because all of the international press corps here has been ordered to leave Iraq. We're in the third day of the air war directed against the Iraqi capital and elsewhere in Iraq and Kuwait by the multinational Armada. The frequent airstrikes against Baghdad continued overnight. The destruction is gradually altering the skyline of the Iraqi capital. Traffic in the streets of the city today seems mainly official vehicles. Most of the population is either staying indoors or already they've evacuated to safer locations in the country. The Minister of Information, Latif Jassin, last night met with the nearly 40 members of the International Press Corps and asserted that Iraq is confident it can withstand the multinational air assault and eventually win victory. The minister was relaxed as he spoke with reporters. He asserted that what he called the electronic war launched against Iraq by President Bush will not succeed. He said that President Bush is, quote, under the illusion that he can score a quick and easy victory against Iraq with such tactics, unquote. The Iraqi official said that President Bush has not reckoned with the Iraqi people's willingness to fight with faith in God, he said, and faith in Saddam Hussein. Now, this morning, orders have come for the press corps to depart from Baghdad, and as of now, they're starting to dismantle the satellite communications. As of this report, the nearly 40 journalists here are packing their bags and assembling cars for the trip to the Jordanian border. This is Peter Arnett, CNN, reporting live from Baghdad.
Peter, I know it's delicate. Can I ask you a question?
It all depends. Ask the question and I'll see if I can answer it.
All right, good enough. Let me start with this one. We reported that you may be allowed to return in 3 to 5 days. Why 3 to 5 days?
The Ministry of Information is saying that conditions in the hotel are not adequate for the press, that the hygienic conditions are poor, the water is limited, and they feel that it'll take some time to organize the locale here, organize the hotel to make it for this number of journalists to stay here. That is the reason they're giving. I have no other information about why it would be that period of time for us to return.
Can you tell? Would it be all right for you to describe the scene in Baghdad right now? What does the city look like?
Hello? Well, you know, as I said in my dispatch, the city remains quiet. There has been no panic here. From what we can see, there have been no civilian targets hurt by the bombing. Now, in the hotel, the press corps, I think, is generally disappointed that it is required to leave. We had basically settled down here. We'd learned to live with the danger, and we seemed happy enough, well, the colleagues that I know, to try to cover the Iraqi side of what's going on. This decision by the Iraqi government to send us out of the country was unexpected, and I think we are reluctant to go, but it looks as though we have no choice.
Would it be all right to ask you if President Saddam Hussein has been seen, or can you tell us anything about the president of Iraq?
President Saddam Hussein was seen in the morning of late in the morning of the first raid. We have not seen the president in the past few days. His information minister, Jassim, did say that the President Saddam Hussein was confident that he was directing the defenses of the country, but other than that, we have not seen him. There's no power in the city, so there's been very limited television. There have been some television broadcasts, but they're limited to the parts of the city that can pick up such transmissions, such as the hotel, where there is limited power from a generator.
And in those limited broadcasts, have there been any broadcasts from Saddam Hussein to...
No, there hasn't.
There have not been. The problem of can you tell us about the we quoted a BBC reporter concerning the infrastructure, meaning utilities, roadways, water, electricity. Can you tell us anything at all about conditions in that regard? Is that all right?
It's very limited to what I can say, other than you could expect the impact on the city of nearly 2.5 days of concentrated bombing on conditions. But we are pretty much limited to the hotel. Their officials are reluctant to let us move around in the city. Judging from the conditions in the hotel, there are limited facilities here, and I think you may draw your own conclusions as the conditions in the rest of the city. I wish I could go into that more, but at the moment I cannot.
All right, Peter, again, I certainly don't want to put you in any kind of jeopardy or do anything indelicate. Can you comment on, have you heard anything about the Iraqi government's claims of American prisoners having been shot out of the sky?
Could you repeat that, please? There's an announcement going on here.
All right. What I was asking about is any American prisoners. Will the Iraqi government let you speak at all about the possibility of prisoners?
Well, I can quote the Minister of Information, Mr. Jazem, last night. I asked him that question. What about American pilots from all these planes that were allegedly shot down? Would we see the wreckage? Would we get to meet the pilots? He says they did have captured Americans and he would take them to us at some point to meet them. But beyond his words, we have no information about any aspect of that part of the story.
Peter, have you, aside from the government officials who are with you, have you talked with any Iraqis in the street, citizens of Baghdad?
It is very difficult to touch people. Certainly the mood is somber here. The air attacks are coming with regularity now. Certainly the mood is depressing. I think that the people we have talked to are basically surprised about what's going on and don't seem to know what to do about it. I think they realize they can't do anything about it. It's sort of an inevitable onslaught that is hammering at them day and night.
Peter, it has been observed numbers of times since you have been reporting from the Iraqi capital that you have vast experience in war reporting from your days in Vietnam. Are you allowed in any way to compare what you are seeing now to what you saw then?
I think everyone is commenting, including local officials, about the surgical precision about the air bombardment. It is remarkable. I can't go into detail about what targets are being hit or what installations are being hit, but there doesn't seem to have been any civilian casualty. It's remarkable, the surgical precision of these strikes, that buildings are being taken out in populated areas without damaging adjoining structures. It is remarkable. That is what surprises me about the whole operation, the skill in which the targets have been demolished here. It is remarkable and frightening.
Can we get a head count not only of the CNN people who are with you, any others that you can tell us about in terms of numbers, and we trust everyone is okay?
I believe the Ministry of Information is saying there are 38 international journalists here. Probably 10, 12 of them are Americans. We have 3 from CNN, Robert Wiener and Nick Robertson and myself. NBC has people. There are a couple. There is Don Kirk from USA Today. There's about 38 international journalists. In addition, at the hotel here, there are members of a peace group, Americans, Germans, who have been down at the border trying to prevent war. They're sitting here. Their mission obviously failed. They don't seem to have many resources. They've been trying to get out of here for 3 days. They're around in the lobby wearing their T-shirts. But they would also, I think, would like to leave today with the International Press Corps.
Peter, I wonder if the Ministry of Information, if you can quote them in any way concerning attacks on Israel.
I've just been informed here that I've been talking with you long enough and that they require me to get off the phone and they will begin dismantling our communication. So this is Peter Arnett reporting live, probably the final report for a while, from Baghdad.
Peter Arnett, that report taped about an hour ago, apparently his last from Baghdad, as the government there has ordered all international media representatives out of the country. We have late word from Algiers. Algeria's ruling party today urged all Arab nations to enter the war immediately on the side of Iraq and called for all diplomatic and economic links to be severed with members of the anti-Iraq coalition. The call came less than 24 hours after some 100,000 supporters of the Islamic Salvation Front marched through Algiers to demand that the government open training camps for volunteers wishing to fight alongside Iraq. In an editorial headline, The Battle of Arabs and Muslims, the National Liberation Front organ urged Arab governments to put their political, military, and economic potential at the disposal of Iraq's President Saddam Hussein. And repeating this just in, Algeria's ruling party is urging all Arab nations to enter the war on the side of Iraq. Molly?
Several Israeli officials are saying that Saddam Hussein will not go unpunished. Iraq sent several more missiles into Israel early this morning, making that the second attack within 30 hours. Israeli officials say about a dozen people in Tel Aviv were slightly injured and the damage was light. The second attack is fanning the fear that the Persian Gulf War will widen, that Israel will join the war. CNN's Richard Roth reports.
After two false alarms during the night, when the sun came up on Tel Aviv, many thought Israel had avoided another night of Iraqi missile attacks. They were wrong. Millions went into the sealed rooms and shelters while the missiles fell. There was fear it would be a chemical weapons attack. The missiles were fired from western Iraq. The Scuds slammed into civilian neighborhoods, tearing into homes and stores. One made a direct hit on a bomb shelter which was empty at the time. These men yelled, "The government wanted us to stay in there, but we thought it wasn't safe." The government said at least 10 people were lightly injured in the attacks. Tel Aviv residents saw the missiles come in and felt the effects of the blasts.
We heard the boom and everyone sit in the floor and try to be a little not confused.
The ground-to-ground missiles had conventional warheads, not chemical ones. Men in chemical suits, though, were on the scene quickly in the zones that were affected. A lot of property damage in those areas, but casualties were low. Authorities say it's a miracle the missile strikes did not result in any deaths.
Thanks God, no casualties, 3 slightly wounded. The buildings which were damaged will be renovated and repaired. This we can always do. Life of people who can never bring again. This is not the last missile.
Israel told its citizens to stay indoors once again, though the explosions forced many out into the streets to look for family and friends. The morale of the city still seems high. People are remaining calm in the wake of 2 nights of terror.
People seeing us consoling them have such a boost of morale that it is more than any psychologist can do for them.
But Tel Aviv remains the favorite target of Saddam Hussein. An Israeli defense official said Iraq appears to be trying to home in on one particular area of Tel Aviv, perhaps one with strategic value. But so far, the missiles have found only the homes of innocent civilians. Richard Roth, CNN, Tel Aviv.
Still to come, we'll have live reports from the White House and the Pentagon as CNN's Gulf coverage continues.
As the war in the Gulf continues, CNN is the network with the most complete coverage. From the Middle East and around the world, now more than ever, stay with the world's news leader, CNN.
World economics, an ever-changing machine affecting every minute of your life. CNN gives you a look at this machine each day in a way you can understand. Business news to keep you in time with change on CNN.
CNN's coverage of the war in the Gulf continues now with reports from the United States. First, Pam Olson has been keeping the overnight watch at the White House. Pam, pretty quiet there at this hour?
Very quiet at this hour, Rick, but very strong reaction from elsewhere here in Washington from the Israeli embassy. A spokesperson there seems to imply that Israeli patience is wearing thin.
This is yet another unprovoked, indiscriminate terrorist attack on an innocent, peaceful population of a non-combatant country. As stated in the past, it is the responsibility of the government of Israel to defend its citizens, and therefore it will be the government of Israel which will decide if, when and how to react.
Yesterday, President Bush, after the first attack, praised Israel for not retaliating. He said then that he hopes such restraint will continue. But he also acknowledged that if attacked, Israel certainly has the right to protect herself, the right to protect her people. Yesterday, he was so concerned about the situation that he telephoned Israeli Prime Minister Shamir to try to offer assurances that Allied forces could eliminate the threat.
I think that they know of our determination to safeguard them following this attack or prior to this attack. And we are going to be redoubling our efforts in the darndest search and destroy effort that's ever been undertaken in that out in that area. And I hope that that is very reassuring to the citizens of Israel.
Those comments yesterday from President Bush after the first attack. No comment yet from the White House, but President Bush does know about the attack. He was awakened early this morning, soon after it occurred. He was briefed on the telephone by his national security advisor. Later this morning, the president will have a war briefing up at Camp David by his national security advisors. Rick.
Pam, as far as you know, does the president intend to stay at Camp David until Monday?
Yes, Rick, he will be there throughout the weekend and through Monday. He's planning to return to Washington, I believe, afternoon on Monday. Of course, he could always change his mind, but he feels like he has all the high-tech communications equipment up there. He can monitor the situation right from Camp David, and his advisors can also go to him.
One other question for you. It's very early in the morning in Washington, D.C., 19 minutes past 5. Are the protest demonstrators still across the street?
Rick, they are still across the street. They usually take a break, actually, about this time, I suppose, have breakfast of sorts. You can see them now. They have been here 24 hours a day. They seem to be here 7 days a week. What you're looking at now, this is different. These protesters, I've noticed only the last couple of days, they are supporters of U.S. policy in the Persian Gulf. And not too far from them, of course, you have the anti-war protesters. Police say, however, that the two groups sometimes battling each other out to see who is the loudest and who can get the most number of cars to honk. But police say that for the most part it has been peaceful, although in the last 24 hours or 36 hours there have been a couple of scuffles, and yesterday more than a dozen arrests. Pam Olson, CNN Live, the White House.
All right, thanks, Pam. We will be checking back with you. Molly?
CNN's Jeff Levine is monitoring the situation at the Pentagon in Washington for us today. Jeff, what is the Pentagon saying about its plans in the wake of the latest attack on Israel?
Good morning, Molly. Pentagon briefers are going to be among those counseling the president at Camp David a bit later today. Obviously, they're going to be talking about that second Scud missile attack against Israel. The Scuds have posed a serious problem for Pentagon planners. The missiles are very, very mobile. They're easy to hide. It's really not clear how many of these missiles Iraq has left in its quiver, but the answer could be in the hundreds. The Allied air war has been successful so far, say Pentagon officials, but they indicate now it may drag into February. In the meantime, is Israel going to sit on the sidelines? The situation does put a lot of pressure on the Air Force. Now, with the clock ticking, the pilots have to track down and destroy those Scud missiles. And the air war is not only taking a toll on Iraq, it's taking a bit of a toll on U.S. forces as well. Another 4 airmen have been reported missing. Jeff Levine, CNN, reporting live at the Pentagon.
Jeff, there you are. Jeff, in reference to the last statement you made, the Pentagon saying anything about missing airmen?
Well, we do have some names, Molly. Let me give them to you now. They are Major Thomas Koritz and Major Donnie Holland of the U.S. Air Force. They were flying an F-15E. Also reported missing are Navy Lieutenants Robert Wetzel and Jeffrey Zahn. They were flying a carrier-based A-6. So that brings the total of missing U.S. airmen now in the Gulf War to 7, Molly.
Would you define, Jeff, just real quickly what the Pentagon means when it says missing?
Well, I've had a couple of different answers to that one this morning. I think we can say that missing means really missing in action, and the Pentagon doesn't really go into a great deal of specifics, except to say that if the name is released, one can infer the worst. These people are lost under violent circumstances in combat. It doesn't say that they're captured. It doesn't say that they're killed. It says that they are missing, they haven't returned, they are lost in action in some way.
All right, that's CNN's Jeff Levine reporting for us live this morning from the Pentagon. We thank him for that. Stay with us. CNN's coverage of the war in the Gulf will continue.
Our coverage of the war continues now with the latest update live from Saudi Arabia. Joining us is Rick Salinger. Rick, the first missile attack on Israel also saw a missile aimed in your direction. Was there any recurrence of that, any attempt for additional missiles towards Saudi Arabia tied in with this latest missile attack on Israel?
No, there was not. In fact, there was some fear that that might turn out to be the case, because with the first missile attack on Israel, almost simultaneously, a Scud was launched in this direction at Saudi Arabia. However, it was successfully intercepted by a U.S. Patriot missile, and no harm was done. What we are getting back here now are reports from up around the border between northern Saudi Arabia and Kuwait that additional fighting has been going on and that 40 Iraqis have been killed by U.S. Marines. And in those skirmishes, 4 Marines have been injured, including one seriously when hit by shrapnel. Now, this is taking place around Khafji, which is just about on the border between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. We understand that U.S. helicopter attacks took place early today on occupied Kuwait. U.S. A-10 Warhogs were also used along with the Cobra helicopters. They knocked out Iraqi mortar positions using tow missiles and also rockets. While these attacks have been going on, so too have the regular air attacks going on deep inside Iraq, including Baghdad. The most advanced of the U.S. fighters is, of course, the stealth fighter, the F-117A. It is now being seen for the first time in use here in this theater of operations. The stealth, of course, looks like something from outer space. It is designed to go undetected by enemy radar. It has been used to go into Baghdad and positions around there to knock out command and communication centers. The commander of that particular fighter wing says the missions have been successful. Colonel Walton Whitley told us that his men have been doing an excellent job. They are young pilots, and this is, of course, a new machine which has never been tested in combat before. It all is going smoothly. He likened it pretty much to a football game. He says their job is to knock out the spotters, to disrupt communication between the command and the troops in the field. One more thing to address here from eastern Saudi Arabia, and that is that the U.S. Consulate in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, has announced a voluntary departure for any U.S. citizens and their dependents who may want to leave. Now, we should emphasize that this is not an evacuation we are talking about. They've chosen their words very carefully. It is a voluntary departure. Those U.S. citizens who are interested should contact the U.S. Consulate in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. What they're doing is arranging for a military airlift to get them to some safe place. Now, when these flights will occur and exactly where they will go is not known at the present time. So the war is expanding, the casualties are picking up, and many civilians are wanting out. Live from Saudi Arabia, I'm Rick Salinger, CNN.
Rick, let's talk a little more about the Americans over there, the civilians and the dependents. Our State Department in Washington is saying that at this time, as you report, that there are no plans for evacuation. But are they urging these American citizens, the dependents of the military over there, to get out now?
No, they are not urging them to get out. What they are trying to do is make a way for them to get out if they so choose. The commercial flights out of Saudi Arabia have been stopped altogether. There has been no commercial activity at the Dhahran airport since this war began, and so there is no way out of the country for those who choose to leave. Early on in August, a voluntary evacuation had been put into effect. Many chose to get out while they could on commercial carriers, but now others who have chosen to leave with that attempted missile attack here in Saudi Arabia have decided that maybe they've waited a little too long and they do want to go. So Uncle Sam is getting into the picture and saying now that it will make a military airlift available, but they're going to have to pay for it, and perhaps at 150% of the cost of a regular commercial flight.
All right, Rick, thanks so much. Rick Salinger reporting live from Saudi Arabia. Our war coverage continues in a couple of minutes.
This is CNN.
We have something that has just moved on the wires I think we should bring to your attention. This just into CNN. Officials in Beirut, Lebanon, say the staff of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut has been evacuated, apparently fearing possible terrorist attacks. According to a Lebanese daily newspaper, that report, the U.S. State Department, the 30-member staff, including the Ambassador Ryan Crocker, was evacuated by U.S. military helicopters late last night. The staff was flown from the compound in the northeastern suburb of Acre to the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean Sea. Repeating, in Lebanon, officials say the staff of the U.S. Embassy has been evacuated in Beirut for fear of possible terrorist attacks. Iraq is not abandoning its attempt to draw Israel into the Persian Gulf War. Israel was hit by several missiles early today. CNN's Mark Leff has this and other developments in the Persian Gulf War.
For the second time in just over 24 hours, Iraqi missiles hit parts of Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. For the second time, Israeli officials reported only minor damage and fewer than a dozen injuries, and warned the threat was not over.
The buildings which were damaged will be renovated and repaired. This we can always do. Life of people who can never bring again. This is not the last missile.
Israeli authorities had sounded air raid sirens 3 times overnight. All of those were false alarms, though a piece of a Soviet booster rocket that had launched a spy satellite into orbit Friday did streak across the Israeli sky around midnight as it fell from orbit. The Israeli government says it will respond to the latest missile attack. It says 3 landed, but will not say when or how it'll retaliate against Iraq's President Saddam Hussein.
He's trying to steer the Arab masses over the Middle East by proving that he can hit Israel with his missiles. And he must know that there will be a price to pay for that.
Baghdad radio said Iraq had launched 11 missiles. Iraq called on Muslims around the world to attack United States interests and said it was expelling all remaining non-Iraqi journalists. The U.S. Embassy in Bangkok said Saturday it received what it called a credible threat of terrorist action this weekend against U.S., Israeli, Australian, and European diplomatic missions. There's a report from Bahrain that border guards have closed the 16-mile-long causeway that links the Persian Gulf island state to eastern Saudi Arabia. Newspapers there say the Saudis asked Friday that only military and government traffic be allowed through, except for Saudi citizens returning from Bahrain, which hosts both British and U.S. military bases. The U.S. Defense Department has released the names of 4 more U.S. pilots it says are missing. So far, the official word is that 8 Allied aircraft, 4 from the U.S., have not returned from missions against Iraqi targets. The Defense Department, which drafted 29 civilian aircraft last August to help the U.S. military build up in Saudi Arabia, has ordered Phase 2 of the Civil Reserve Air Fleet program, giving it authority to use more than 180 more civilian planes to help move equipment for Operation Desert Sword. That happened just hours after U.S. military planners got presidential authority to keep reservists in uniform beyond their 6-month call-up, and authority to activate up to 1 million more if needed. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
Jordan says it is not siding with any country in the Gulf, but its ambassador to France says Jordan will try to stop any Israeli warplane that flies across its airspace to strike at Iraq. Baghdad fired more missiles at Israel, as we've been reporting early this morning, and several Israeli officials now indicate retaliation is almost inevitable. But what would Israeli retaliation do to the anti-Iraq coalition in the Persian Gulf? To explore this and other questions, we go live now to London. Philip Robbins is the director of the Middle Eastern program at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Mr. Robbins, welcome to CNN. The latest we have this morning is that Algeria is now calling for all Arab countries to cut off relations with those Arab coalition members and to join in an all-out war against Western powers in Israel. What effect will that have on the coalition?
Well, I think it's very interesting to note that the two Arab countries which have spoken up so far so vocally against the U.S. attack and in favor of Iraq have been Jordan and Algeria, which of course are the two countries in the Arab world which have the greatest degree of political participation. I think that this is very worrying because it indicates the extent to which, at a mass level, the Arab people have extremely strong reservations about what's going on in the area at the moment. I think in other Arab states, obviously the Syrians has been mentioned on a number of occasions. The fact that the Syrian regime is a much stronger one with a much firmer hold on society means that it will try and keep the Arab protests, which may be simmering under the surface, it will try and keep them off the streets. But really we have gone into a very tense period. It's the sort of development which everybody feared might take place. And I think the next 2 or 3 days are going to be crucial as to the way in which this conflict goes and to whether it opens out into a more general conflict.
Well, let's talk about the Arab members of the coalition. We have Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, the exiled rulers of Kuwait, and the Arab Emirates. How will calls by their Arab brothers to start to dismantle that coalition really affect them? Is it just a psychological threat to them, or can they stand firm with Western powers?
Well, I think you also have to add Morocco to that list as well. The Moroccans initially were quite very strongly in favor of the deployment of Arab forces to Saudi Arabia, and I think there are Moroccan forces on the ground. Yet it's Morocco that has also seen quite considerable instability. We saw some rioting a few weeks ago, and the situation in Morocco is very tense as well. So I think that there are reservations about the extent to which the Arab supporters of the coalition outside of the Gulf itself can hold together over the shorter term. I think in the context of this conflict itself, the Gulf members are not a problem, but I think inevitably fears will mount, and fears and concerns will mount about the security of the Gulf states, perhaps over the medium and longer term. Looking at those supporters outside the Gulf, the Egyptians, President Mubarak has been the most supportive figurehead of the coalition, but I think there's increasing evidence that he may be out of step with the pulse on the streets, which, as I say, has been increasingly concerned about the launching of the attack against the Iraqis.
If the Israelis were to retaliate, and we don't have any real strong evidence that they're absolutely going to do that now, it's all speculation, exactly how much retaliation would it take before you would see that parts of the coalition might crumble?
Well, I think the indications that we're getting, both from Washington and also from the Israelis, is that if retaliation takes place, and I agree with you, it does seem likely at the moment, then it will be measured retaliation, and it will be retaliation which is directed against quite clearly designated military targets inside Iraq, or in other words, there'll be every attempt made by the Israelis as well as the international coalition in general to limit and hopefully to exclude civilian casualties. So I suppose what the Israelis and the Americans want to do is to make sure that there are no civilian casualties which could raise the temperature, raise the anger of people in the Arab world in general, and of course in the Muslim world more widely. However, I think that any sort of Israeli strike against Iraq is bound to heat things up, and of course if that strike, if it comes, brings Israel into some sort of face-to-face confrontation with the Jordanians, then we could have an escalation of the dispute in any case.
Knowing what you know about Jordan and Algeria and their political makeup, do you think that they would independently do anything to Israel outside of a retaliation?
Well, I think that the Jordanians are in an extremely difficult position. On the one hand, they don't really at all want to be part of a conflict. They don't have strong armed forces. They don't have the ability to stand up to the Israelis. They know that if there is a generalized conflict, the chances of the Palestinian population in the occupied territories being expelled will increase. So they're very worried about that. And of course, behind that is the whole issue of the demographic balance within Jordan itself. On the other hand, the feeling of people on the ground, certainly Palestinians in Jordan, but also many Jordanians as well, is very supportive of Iraq. And I think that the Muslim current within Jordan, which is extensive and growing, is also extremely concerned about the American presence in Saudi Arabia. So you have this contradiction or this paradox in Jordan between a strong desire to stay out of any conflict, but at the same time a strong sense of outrage at the actions of the US, what the Israelis might do, and a strong sense of solidarity towards the Iraqis.
What's the strongest thing that President Bush could say to the Arab coalition members to keep them in the fold?
Well, I think that each Arab coalition member has arguably its own problems, and therefore the timetable could be different for each individual state. As I said before, I think that the Gulf states really are likely to stay solidly within the international coalition. After all, they, I think, by welcoming in the Americans and the other forces, by allowing them to launch the attack from their territory, and of course in participating as well, certainly in the case of the Saudi Arabians, they are really irredeemably linked to what is happening in the region and the attempt to confront the Iraqis. I think the Egyptians, they have this bilateral peace with Israel. They'll be reluctant to see that go. So I think perhaps the Egyptians are arguably likely to be the more solid of the three main states outside the Gulf. But really, I think each one of them has their own concerns, their own problems, and therefore the situation is likely to be different for each one.
You're an expert on this region. Have you been surprised by any of the developments in this war so far? Are you surprised by the attack on Israel?
Well, I'm not really surprised by the attack on Israel. I think it was always to be expected. The Iraqis said that they would do it. The Israelis obviously were extremely concerned that it would be done to them. There was an attempt to take out the Scud missile sites, but it was always clear that the mobile launchers in particular, ones which could be well camouflaged, would be difficult to take out quickly. There was the whole question of whether chemical weapons would be used. The fact that chemical weapons haven't been used strongly suggests that the Iraqis don't have the ability to link chemical weapons with long-range missiles. That suggests to me that if the Scud missiles or the Scud missile launchers can be taken out, then the ability of Iraq to take the conflict and to continue to take the conflict to Israel will be very, very much reduced. Therefore, if we can get through this particularly difficult passage of the next 2 or 3 days, then I think the prospects for the coalition will begin to look better again.
Does it strike you that the fact that there have been no Israeli deaths that we know of from these Scud missile attacks, do you think that has any bearing on what decision the Israeli government might make?
Well, I think it does, yes, certainly. I mean, the Israeli government, of course, has been under strong pressure from members of the international coalition not to go ahead with a retaliatory strike against Iraq. But after all, the Israeli government also has to consider the opinions of its own people, and it has to consider its deterrent capability over the longer term, its ability to deter Arab countries from attacking it in the future. The longer it goes on accepting hits without retaliating, the more problematic those two latter concerns will be. And if Israel was accepting the deaths of its citizens without taking any action at all, then I think that would be an almost untenable position internally. So whether chemical weapons are used on the one hand and whether there are fatalities within Israel on the other are highly crucial to the whole question of whether retaliation takes place.
Okay, Philip Robbins of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, we thank you for joining CNN today. We'll be right back.
As our war coverage continues, two interesting reports concerning the Scud missiles. We are just receiving one report from Reuters wire service from Bahrain. British Air Force jets have found previously undetected Scud missile sites in Iraq and are now attacking them. This according to a senior Air Force commander in Bahrain now. Group Captain David Henderson said British and other allied aircraft had identified sites in Iraq in addition to launchers mentioned by U.S. Gulf Commander General Schwarzenkoff on Friday. Destroying the Scud launchers has become the Allies' top priority, and the British Air Force jets are now attacking new ones they have located. Also, we have this report from Paris. A senior French military official says that warplanes from the anti-Iraqi coalition bombed 10 out of 40 Iraqi mobile Scud-B missile launchers on Thursday and early Friday, as well as most of the Iraqi fixed missile sites and storage facilities. Now, 30 of the mobile sites thus remained untouched when air raids resumed Friday afternoon. Before the outbreak of the Gulf War, Iraq reportedly possessed some 800 Soviet-built Scud-B missiles based at 50 fixed launch sites and on 40 mobile launchers, the official said. He added that an estimated 1/4 of them were upgraded rockets, upgraded versions of the original Soviet product. The mobile launchers are extremely difficult to localize for satellites and reconnaissance planes because they are capable of traveling at about 45 miles an hour on roadways and can move to their launching site, release their missiles, and relocate to shelters before they are hit by opposition counterstrikes. And there are those counterstrikes underway right now. We'll have more details as they come in. Molly?
The ruling Ba'ath Socialist Party in Iraq has issued a call for terrorism, telling Muslims they should attack Western interests worldwide. The statement was broadcast on Baghdad radio. It said, "Let the aggressor's interests be set on fire," and it urged Muslims to attack facilities, symbols, and figures of the United States, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, the Emir of Kuwait, and their allies.
What does it feel like to conduct a heart-stopping maneuver over the Red Sea? Here are some of the sights and sounds of Operation Desert Storm as experienced by pilots aboard the USS John F. Kennedy.
We all have our assigned targets, be it coming from the Red Sea or from the Persian Gulf. So there are the attack and the fighter guys that are on the Persian Gulf side, the Arabian Sea side, that have their missions that are primarily over on the eastern side of Iraq. And of course, we're coming out of the Red Sea, so we are primarily targeted against the enemy defenses and against targets in central and western Iraq.
It was pretty wild to drop them for 10 years and not ever see one go off like that.
It's awesome. It's blue sky, and you can see those little white contrails. It's all right.
If they don't do something real quick, they're not going to have any airfields to save them for, because they'll be gone. Like I said, we hit them with impunity. We flew over with 4 or 5 aircraft, plus a number of fighters for escort, and there was nobody there. I mean, the radar contacts were gone. There was nobody anywhere close to provide a threat to us.
Defense spending analysts say the price tag for the first 2 days of Operation Desert Storm could be as high as $1 billion. The planes, missiles, and equipment are adding up to a costly war in the Persian Gulf. The Washington-based Defense Budget Project says the expensive ammunition used against Iraqi forces accounts for a large chunk of the cost. The private analysis group estimates each 20-foot weapon carries a price tag of $1.35 million. The war in the Gulf marks the first time the U.S. has put to use several new weapon systems. CNN's Dan Blackburn reports how these untried weapons are holding up under fire.
This is the view from an F-117A stealth fighter over Baghdad. Representative of the new weapon system seeing full-scale use in the Middle East, the plane is proving to be a key first strike aircraft.
If you go back to the CNN interviews, the reporters were saying, we can hear air raid sirens, we can see the anti-aircraft guns going off, we cannot see or hear any aircraft. Chances are very good what set the sirens and the anti-aircraft guns off were the stealth fighters leaving the bombing area or leaving the target area. They had already delivered their first packages of bombs.
Many of those bombs are what are called smart bombs, which use computers, sometimes linked to small television cameras with night capability, including forward-looking infrared systems known as FLIR, which literally can see in the dark. Smart bombs also are carried by the F-15 Eagle, which is seeing heavy duty in the airstrikes on Iraq and Kuwait. These all-weather fighter bombers are equipped with the Lantern guidance system, which almost flies the plane on its own and permits round-the-clock operations.
It's a system that uses both radar and infrared imagery to give the pilot a presentation so that he can fly the aircraft very close to the ground without really seeing the ground. It actually projects a picture of the terrain, an infrared picture of the terrain in front of you onto your heads-up display.
Joining the F-15 in the air over the Persian Gulf is a plane with the unlikely name of Wild Weasel. Officially labeled the F-4G, this updated Vietnam-era plane is loaded with electronic radar jamming equipment and carries missiles designed to knock out enemy radar.
It's comparable to what most folks would call a game of chicken. The F-4G with the armed missile goes out and detects, identifies, and locates these surface-to-air missile radars, and then plays a game of chicken with them. If they're going to come up and try and shoot a surface-to-air missile at them, we in turn can shoot a high-speed anti-radiation missile back at them a harm. So it's a matter of how close do you get them to look at you, and then shoot them before they shoot you.
From warships offshore, including 2 surviving World War II battleships which have been converted to huge missile platforms, batteries of Tomahawk missiles have been erupting to rain destruction on their targets. They, too, are using technology that lets them adjust their deadly course en route to the target.
As it comes in range of its target, it will actually see it, and it'll see it in 3 dimensions. Because if it's looking for a particular shape, say the presidential palace in Iraq, if it's looking for the shape of that crescent-shaped building, it has to be able to see it from several angles. As soon as it sees it, it locks on that thing and just dives right straight into it.
Getting its first battle test is the Patriot anti-missile system.
The Patriot guidance system looks at the incoming missile or aircraft and measures its velocity and its altitude, its direction, and so on, feeds this to the guidance system in the Patriot missile itself.
And the Patriot, as it did during Thursday's attack on Saudi Arabia, knocks the incoming missile out of the air. Experts say these and other weapons are offering a glimpse of what warfare will be like in the 21st century. Dan Blackburn, CNN, Los Angeles.
Because of our continuous coverage of the war in the Gulf, some of the weekend programming on CNN will be preempted for that coverage. However, many sports shows will air as scheduled, and we will have more war coverage after this.
Many Arab Americans, though thousands of miles away from the conflict in the Gulf, are feeling the heat of the fight. CNN Sean Caleb's reports.
There's no shortage of phone calls. This radio broadcast from New York is called Arabesque, allowing its audience, mostly Arab Americans, to voice opinions. The discussion zeroes in on the Gulf War.
You're not behind the president, then?
I'm not behind this action. No, I'm not.
Many callers don't support the U.S. action. Others target Saddam Hussein.
If we let, and excuse my French, if we let that bastard walk all over us now, it affects the entire world for a lot of years to come. And thank God for what they're doing right now.
But every time Allied fighter jets streak toward their target, and every bomb blast in Iraq hits home with many Arab Americans.
They are watching, fearfully watching, the disaster occurring in their eyes, in front of their eyes, and there is nothing that they can do.
This man's father is from Iraq.
So he's very, very upset about it. He badly wanted for the U.S. not to go ahead and take a first strike against Iraq.
And now some Arab Americans, like this man in California, are experiencing hostilities.
I have been personally, and my wife have been exposed to the hatred feelings among the Americans here. And, you know, it's not a very good feeling.
Security at mosques around the U.S. has been increased. Arab anti-discrimination organizations say hate crimes against people of Arab descent are increasing. Many come here seeking solace and peace of mind. Many others are praying for peace on earth.
I feel strongly that civilians must not be attacked, whether they are in Israel or they are in Kuwait or they are in Iraq or they are in the United States. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Some are thinking about Saddam Hussein. They believe he is carrying the torch for the Palestinians and back the Iraqi leader with heart and soul.
I support Saddam Hussein 100%. Whatever he do, he's standing up for the Palestinian people.
Still others try not to choose a side. They just hope and pray the bloodshed ends soon. Sean Caleb, CNN, reporting.
Stay with CNN for more on the Gulf War. I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Rick Moore. The news continues.
Second straight day, Scud missiles launched by Iraq have landed in Tel Aviv. Good day, I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Rick Moore. CNN's coverage of the war in the Gulf continues now. This second attack on Tel Aviv threatens to bring Israel into the war. Israeli officials say Israel will respond, but they do not say when or how. CNN's Jennifer Michaels has more on the attack.
This time it happened in broad daylight. This time it happened on the Jewish Sabbath. For the second day in a row, the Tel Aviv area was hit by Iraqi missiles. Israeli defense officials say several missiles landed. The mayor of Tel Aviv says 2 fell in the city itself. There were some injuries, but no immediate reports of deaths.
According to what I expected, it's things were not serious, as long as people were not killed and were not severely wounded.
The missile strike did leave emotional scars.
We're scared, everyone's scared, and we try not to panic.
In a familiar routine, Israeli residents were told to put on gas masks and seek shelter, though Israel says this missile strike, like the first, was a conventional, not a chemical attack. Baghdad Radio interrupted its broadcast with a statement saying, "This moment we are launching 11 missiles at the enemy." The United States has urged Israel not to lash back at Iraq, fearing Israel's entry into the Gulf War could cause Arab nations to defect from the anti-Iraq coalition. Israel did not respond to the first attack, but a senior Israeli advisor says this time will be different.
We shall respond. We will not let him terrorize us, as I told you. We will respond to that, and we will decide how and when and where.
U.S. and allied warplanes have been zeroing in on Iraqi mobile Scud missile sites in a bid to cripple Iraq's ability to attack Israel. One Israeli official says if the U.S. can't do something to stop Iraqi missile strikes, Israel will. Much like the first night of Operation Desert Storm, Baghdad was battered Friday night by another round of heavy Allied bombing. Electricity, water supplies, and telephone communications reportedly have been knocked out. Citing unsanitary conditions in the city, the Iraqi Information Ministry is ordering all international journalists in the country to leave immediately. Jennifer Michael, CNN, reporting.
CNN's Peter Arnett is among those journalists who is being forced to leave Baghdad. Peter has been bringing us reports from the Iraqi capital since the very beginning of the war. Earlier this morning, he filed this report, possibly his last, which was censored by Iraqi government officials.
We have restored CNN's communications with the outside world from Baghdad, as you can hear, but it may be the final report because all of the international press corps here has been ordered to leave Iraq. We are in the third day of the air war directed against the Iraqi capital and elsewhere in Iraq and Kuwait by the multinational Armada. The frequent airstrikes against Baghdad continued overnight. The destruction is gradually altering the skyline of the Iraqi capital. Traffic in the streets of the city today seems mainly official vehicles. Most of the population is either staying indoors Already, they've evacuated to safer locations in the country. The Minister of Information, Latif Jassin, last night met with the nearly 40 members of the International Press Corps and asserted that Iraq is confident it can withstand the multinational air assault and eventually win victory. The minister was relaxed as he spoke with reporters. He asserted that what he called the electronic war launched against Iraq by President Bush will not succeed. He said that President Bush is, quote, under the illusion that he can score a quick and easy victory against Iraq with such tactics, unquote. The Iraqi official said that President Bush has not reckoned with the Iraqi people's willingness to fight with faith in God, he said, and faith in Saddam Hussein. Now, this morning, orders have come for the press corps to depart from Baghdad, and as of now, they're starting to dismantle the satellite communications. As of this report, the nearly 40 journalists here are packing their bags and assembling cars for the trip to the Jordanian border. This is Peter Arnett, CNN, reporting live from Baghdad.
And we might report that it is our understanding that Peter and the other international media representatives in Baghdad are presently going to be on their way out of Iraq into Jordan. And incidentally, CNN's John Holloman and Bernie Shaw, who were in Baghdad with Peter, are now safe in Amman, Jordan. Molly?
I believe we're going to go to Richard Roth. He's in Tel Aviv and reporting live for us this morning. Yes, indeed, we are going to Richard Roth. Hello, Richard.
Good morning. Good morning. Tel Aviv is still standing. People I know in the United States, certainly with some relatives and family and friends here, based upon the reports you might be seeing, obviously will be very concerned. The city is still here, and certainly the buildings that have been hit by the missiles that struck have considerable damage, but everyone else and everything else is still standing. I've just returned moments ago from a news briefing conducted by Nachman Shai, Brigadier General of the Israeli Defense Force. It's the first large-scale military statement we've had on after this second round of missile attacks by Iraq, and certainly my report, like all of those you'll be seeing out of Israel, are cleared by censors, and there are certain things we have not been able to say and will not be able to say, and in fact that was referred to by the Brigadier General at this briefing. He said that our reports are being seen or watched by the Iraqi government, and we don't want to help them, he said, in their missile attacks. He said, quote, if anyone here, referring to the press, would like to commit suicide, I urge you to do it outside of the country. He did say that as a result of this last round of attacks, 10 civilians were wounded. These injuries were minor injuries. A total of now of 30 people have been moderately injured as a result of the 2 missile raids in the last 48 hours. He said the missiles hit different locations in Israel, some in the center, some in the north. He said he would not give the exact locations, according to the IDF spokesman. Some of the other things he talked about, he said Israel respects the freedom of the press, but he asked journalists to respect the laws and regulations of the state of Israel. He said the Israeli people depend for their safety on the information provided by the press. He says it's a question of human life, and he asked reporters to be general, not specific. As for the attack, he said all these missiles were long-range missiles launched out of western Iraq. All the warheads were conventional, not chemical. He said they hit civilian populations in the center and north, as I said earlier. Damage was done to property. He said this was not unexpected, these attacks. For weeks, Israel has been bracing for Iraqi army tactics like this. He said various statements from officials had already predicted, as I'm sure the world heard. Tariq Aziz said in Geneva, no doubt that Israel would be the first place Iraq would strike. The Brigadier General of the Israeli Defense Force said that Israel believes that these missile attacks will continue for the next few days, so long as those launchers are mobile, alive, and active. He said, quote, we take that into consideration in our working operations in the next few days. Of course, a lot can be read into that statement. At least 2 alarms were heard during the night here. Some people have labeled them false alarms. The Brigadier General said they were not false alarms. One was based on an explosion heard in Jerusalem, and the second was a Soviet satellite breaking up in the atmosphere, which triggered the air raid sirens. He said that the Israeli people should be praised for the way they've handled these 2 nights of terror. He said the public, he believes, is still holding firm, and it's a source of pride for all Israelis how the country is holding up under the missile attacks. He said that more missiles are expected. He urged the public to follow all rules, and those rules include staying inside sealed rooms in the event of a chemical weapons attack. And he said Israel cannot rule out a chemical weapons attack. He said just because they haven't happened doesn't mean they don't have the chemical warheads. That's the latest here from Tel Aviv. Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
All right, thanks very much for that, Richard Roth. Stay with CNN. We will go live to Washington for live reports from the Pentagon and the White House as our coverage continues.